my guest today is someone who's helping prove just how powerful science and data can be in modern horticulture. Noémi Pépin is an associate scientist at Organigram in Moncton, New Brunswick, where through her research in controlled environment production, she's helped drive improvements in cultivation, efficiency, yield, and crop consistency, using data-driven trials to influence everything from lighting strategies to nutrient management. She's also a mentor, collaborator, and published researcher helping shape the future of modern horticulture. That impact has earned her recognition as one of our first She Grows honorees. So, Noémi, thank you for joining me today to share a little bit about your story and your journey.
Thank you so much, Amy. It means a lot.
So to kind of get us started, and this is what I've been doing with everyone, I want to hear a little bit about how you got where you are. What have been some of the milestones in your career path?
I've always been curious about how things work, especially when it comes to the world we live in. So thinking about plants, nature, the environment, and how they all interact with each other. I also really enjoy solving problems. So science felt like a natural fit pretty early on for me. So one of my earliest memories with plants is actually a bit of a funny one. I remember sowing peas with my grandfather in his garden, and then showing up at his house the very next day, knocking on the door and asking if we could harvest and eat the peas already. So it's it's safe to say that my understanding of how plants grow has improved quite a bit since then.
Yeah. You've come far.
Yeah, I've come really far. As I went through school, biology was always my favorite subject, which led me to pursue a bachelor's and a master's at Université de Moncton. And during that time, I had the chance to work both in the lab, with sterile pipettes and petri dishes, but also in growth chambers with plants and dirt and nutrients, which I really enjoyed. And during my schooling, I ended up specializing in plant pathology. I did some work on powdery mildew, and that's where I was first introduced to cannabis research. And this is what I think is a really cool story. But at the time, I was actually collaborating with Organigram for some of my experiments, which was quite unique since this was before recreational cannabis was legalized. So there weren't many opportunities like that, and it felt really special to be a part of something so new. Eventually, in 2016, my honors thesis project on cannabis powdery mildew received a provincial award. And I think that was a key moment for me. It made me realize how quickly the industry was growing and that there was a real opportunity to build a career in an emerging field of horticulture where there's still so much to learn and so much to discover. Another big milestone was getting my master's research published, as you mentioned. I think that's every student's dream. So yeah, that was a really proud moment. And not long after that, I made the transition from academia to industry, which was a big shift. It kind of changed how I think about science, from working in an academic setting to applying it in a very fast-paced environment where decisions need, to work at scale. So yeah, I joined Organigram as a part of the plant science team there and started working on cultivation improvement trials. A big milestone there for me has been seeing that work influences real production decisions. It's super rewarding to test an idea and watch it shape how we grow thousands of plants every day. And with that said, yeah, I'll be celebrating 5 years with Organigram in August, which is a little surreal. Being able to see both my work and my team's work make a real impact has been fulfilling, and I'm super grateful to be in a role that allows me to keep doing that. And to close that off, being here today with you as a part of She Grows is honestly such an honor. I do believe that visibility and representation matter so much in science and horticulture. And it's great to see initiatives like this highlighting the different paths and the impact women are having in these fields. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it is our hope, right, to, highlight those voices and show women that the sky's the limit in this industry. So
Yeah, it's amazing.
yeah. Um, so in your nomination, your colleague, John Mace, it was beautifully written and thoughtfully presented. So he spoke at length about the trialing, and that you're designing trials to directly impact production at scale. So what is your approach to turning that research into something that's, practical and actionable for a commercial operation? And like, can you share an example of, one of your trials that led to, a meaningful shift in how you do things?
Yes, absolutely. So for the first part of your question, my approach usually starts with a clear production question or an observation or a problem. I'm thinking something that's tied to yield, quality, cost, efficiency. So when you start with that, it's a clear reason for doing the work.
Right. Yeah.
And then from there, I design trials that are both scientifically sound and also realistic for a commercial setting. So things like, what space are we working with? What are the limitations that we have? How many treatments do we want to trial? How many cultivars should we evaluate this treatment on? Making sure that we have proper controls is also super important, and collecting meaningful data. But also in the back of your mind, you always have to consider labor, you have to consider cost, and how easily these things can be scaled up.
Yeah.
So we also try to mirror real cultivation conditions when we run trials. So we do have our own plant science section, which is a luxury, and it's really great. It's given us a lot of flexibility. And then scaling things up over time. So sometimes that means a few smaller trials first, trial and error. And other times, if the results are really clear and the risks are low and the results are clear and promising, we can move more quickly and implement right away. There's also collaboration, I think, that is a big part of it. The cultivation and operations teams are working with the plants every day. So I think involving them really helps make sure that what we're testing is practical and implementable for them. And then for the second part of your question, this one's really exciting. So an example that comes to mind is a project that I worked on for a little over a year. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the different stages in cannabis cultivation, but you typically start in propagation where you have your clones, they're going to develop some roots, and then eventually moving on to the vegetative stage where it's kind of like we're getting the plants ready, growing healthy to get them ready to be switched to flower, which is the third stage. And we noticed that our competitors were growing plants in the vegetative stage for about 2 weeks, while we were growing ours for 3. So we started looking at whether we could shorten that timeline without impacting plant health or performance. We ran multiple iterations of trials, playing around with things like environmental condition, lighting, irrigation, and also how we manage the canopy. And over time, we were able to achieve similar growth and biomass in 2 weeks instead of 3. And we even saw some improvements in plant health. So once we were confident with the results, we implemented these changes in cultivation. And a fun part of this trial was that we didn't fully anticipate at the beginning that there would be an impact on space. So by reducing the time plants spent in veg, we needed less veg space, which allowed us to convert 3 veg rooms into 3 flower rooms. Great example of how small changes can end up having a really big impact when applied at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And the longevity of that project too, like for a year,
Yeah, well, we changed so many things, right? So you start with one thing and then you build onto that.
So, cannabis production is one of the most advanced forms of controlled environment agriculture. And I think you touched on this just a moment ago, but what makes it such a unique space to work in from a scientific perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and honestly, a bit of a tricky one for me to answer because as you heard my story, this is really the environment I've always worked in. So I haven't had the chance to work in other areas of horticulture. And I do know that there are some really advanced greenhouse operations in the vegetable space as well. But I do think cannabis production is pretty unique, especially from a scientific perspective. Like you mentioned, it is a highly controlled environment. We're talking about very precise control over things like temperature, humidity, lighting, CO2, the media we grow our plants in, irrigation, airflow. I could go on.
Yeah.
Um, and cannabis in particular can tolerate and respond to very high light levels, which is actually quite unique compared to a lot of other crops. On top of that, as you know, it's also a highly regulated environment,
Yes.
which does add another layer of complexity. There's a strong focus on product quality and product safety, things like testing for pesticides, heavy metals, microbials, potency, and even visual standards. Like people don't even know that that's a thing, but
Yes.
visual standards for the final product, such as color, size, trimming quality, aroma, those are all, considered. And then there's all the tracking and documentation that comes with that.
Yeah.
I'd say another thing that makes it really interesting is that scientifically, it's still a relatively new space compared to crops like tomatoes, cucumbers, potatoes, which have been studied for over 100 years. There's a lot of research happening now, but there's still so many unknowns. And in some parts of the world, access to that research is still limited because of legal restrictions.
Right.
So being able to contribute to that is unique and exciting.
Yeah. You're really kind of at the forefront of the sector, right?
Yeah.
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 No, it is exciting stuff that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is something that you've learned about applying science in a commercial setting that you didn't really pick up or isn't always taught in an academic setting?
I love this question. I think one of the biggest things I've learned is that applying science in a commercial setting is about compromise. I think that balancing what's ideal with what's possible is important. Um, for example, in academia, you're often working in very controlled conditions at small scale, trying to isolate every single variable and get precise results. But when you are in a production environment, things are a lot more dynamic. Our rooms are massive, and there's a lot more noise. So you can't control everything, and you often have to make decisions pretty quickly. So that fast pace was definitely something I found challenging at the beginning when I started working in the industry. And honestly, sometimes it's still something I have to work on. Yeah, things move really, really quickly. I've also learned that something can be statistically significant, but not necessarily relevant or practical to implement in a production setting. You always have, as I mentioned before, you always have to consider labor costs and whether it can be applied or not consistently at scale. And the last thing I would touch on is communication. So I find that the way you communicate science changes quite a bit from academia to cultivation or commercial setting. In academia, you're often focused on, as I mentioned earlier, statistical significance, the details of the experiment, the methods. But in the industry, the conversation shifts more towards impact. So things like yield, efficiencies, quality, margins, and overall performance. So yeah, that's what I would say. That isn't always thought or that you need to adapt when you shift from academic to commercial.
Yeah, I think those are really great points to make. It's almost like you need an economics degree, like, or something like alongside.
Yeah, you learn along
Yours.
the way. You're like, oh
Yeah.
wow, I have a gap here. I need to do more research on this
Yes,
for sure.
it's a definite change of pace.
Yeah.
A big part of your work into improving yield, like you just said, and reducing production costs. And tapping into that economics degree we were talking about, like, how do you balance those two priorities?
Yeah, that's also a great question. I think when you look at yield and cost separately, they can sometimes pull you in opposite directions.
Mm-hmm.
So in my experience, increasing yield often meant increasing inputs. So playing with light, increasing light, water, nutrients, which can drive up costs.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to reduce costs, you're usually trying to do it without impacting yield. I think a lot of it comes down to finding that balance over time. There's definitely some trial and error involved. For example, we ran a trial looking at a higher CO2 target in our grow rooms, and we saw an increase in yield. And as I mentioned earlier, the risks were pretty low, so we implemented it. And after implementing it, we kind of take a step back and we're like, okay, we picked that number. Can we go a little lower, which would increase our margin, right? Reduce our costs,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
not impact yield, right? So we don't know where we stand on that curve, basically. So, it's about going back and making little tweaks. So yeah, it takes time. And as I mentioned, at the end of the day, every input has a cost. So it's always about weighing the benefit against that. And luckily, or not, yeah, luckily or not luckily, with cannabis being such a high value crop, so yeah, luckily, even relatively small gains in yield often outweighs the cost of those extra inputs.
Yeah.
It's been very rare where we've increased an input where the yield increases, did not. It was always worth it, basically.
Yeah.
And then one thing that wasn't mentioned here is that you can't forget about quality. So we're held to pretty high standards. So things like potency, flower size, aroma, appearance still needs to be considered with those
Mm-hmm.
two variables. So when we run trials, we really try to look at the full picture, considering everything.
Yeah. So then how would you describe your leadership approach, especially when guiding teams through these complex trials and these data-driven changes?
I think I would describe my leadership style as collaborative,
Mm-hmm.
and I would also add that I'm very trusting. So I'm really lucky to work with a strong team. I have a lot of trust in their skills and they're very independent. So for me, it's less about directing and more about creating space for people to work together and solve problems. Um, that being said, I've been involving the team more in the process. So whether that's during experimental design or when we're interpreting results, um, one thing I love to do is just to go up to them and ask them for their inputs or observations because they're the ones working with the plants in the rooms with the trials day to day, and they often pick up on things that are really valuable. And this might sound a bit cliche, but also I think communicating the why behind the work is super important. When you're running complex trials or making changes, how you communicate really, really, really matters. And yeah, it just helps people think critically and pay attention to the right details. And yeah, at the same time, I'd say my leadership style is still evolving. Recently, I've been focusing more on delegating and giving some team members more ownership and giving them the opportunity to, run their own trials and be a part of the design and the planning, as well as being involved in the report writing. So it's been really fun to work closely with them. And I think it's a great way to support their growth and to build their
Yes,
confidence.
absolutely. How big is the team that you work with?
We are currently, I think, 10. We
Mm-hmm.
just got 2 summer students, which is really
Oh,
exciting.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have 2 new team members joining as well in a
Oh,
week.
wow. Good.
So we'll be 14 for the summer.
Wow. Wow. It's a
Yeah,
big group and a
yeah.
lot of ideas flying around,
So
right?
many ideas. And I work in cultivation improvements, but I also have, there's other pillars in plant science. So I have a
Yes.
colleague that focuses on phenotyping and breeding, so finding all the new cultivars. Another colleague that works in the lab, the molecular biology, looking at pathogen identification and all these cool things.
Yeah.
Um, and another colleague who works in harvest and post-harvest improvement. So we do a lot of things. We
Yeah.
So our team is very, diverse, and they work in all of these areas. So they have a pretty rounded background and overview of the whole cultivation or commercial production. We
Yeah.
call ourselves a mini organogram.
When you're working with complex data and high stakes production decisions, how have you learned to trust your own judgment? You mentioned before it's a very fast paced environment. What has helped you, build that confidence over time?
Yeah, I think a big part of that comes with experience over time.
Yeah.
I'm definitely more confident today than I was the day I started, I'll tell you that. And yeah, it's honestly something I'm still working on. The industry is complex, but the more trials you run, the more you start to see patterns, what works, what doesn't work, and you start to be able to predict where challenges will come up. I've also learned that mistakes are just a part of the process. Not every idea turns into something that works in production. We've had our fair share of trials that didn't end up being implemented, and that's okay. But there's always something to learn from it.
Yes.
And I think another part of building confidence is trusting the data and making decisions that are supported by strong and repeatable results. The way we run our trials also helps. I touched on this a little earlier, but we start with a smaller scale experiment in our plant science rooms and then scale them up if we see promising results. So that two-step approach helps manage risks. And by the time something moves into production, we have more confidence in how it's going to perform. So that helps a lot. And just as important are really the people around you. I mentioned it before, but I've been really lucky to work with great colleagues and supportive leaders, where there's a lot of collaboration and open discussions. Being able to brainstorm, bounce ideas, and talk through decisions with others makes a huge difference. So basically, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there any moments in your career that challenged you or pushed you to grow in an unexpected ways?
Yes, for sure.
Hmm.
Probably have a long list. I
Don't we
I
all?
I would say some of the biggest growth moments in my career have come from trials that didn't work out or didn't go as planned.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe to give you an example, we ran a small scale trial with a new growing media that was showing promising results. So we moved quickly to implement it in cultivation. And once it was scaled up, we started seeing a lot more unhealthy plants in the vegetative stage. And looking back, there were some early signs, not super obvious ones, but there were some signs in the trial that we didn't fully recognize at the time.
Hmm.
And that experience really changed how I approach trials. It made me more attentive to small details, and more thoughtful about how quickly we scale things up. If there's a lot of hesitations, this might warrant a second trial, or let's try it at scale in one room before, going all in. And then another area that's pushed me to grow has been communication, especially public speaking. It it doesn't come naturally to me. I think I'm pretty good at hiding it. But I really enjoy working in the background, and I still get nervous, but I've been working on it, and forcing myself to do it has helped me improve for sure. So I'd say overall, a lot of that growth has come from learning from mistakes and being willing to step outside my comfort zone a bit.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying about how mistakes, like they are okay,
Yeah.
because ultimately, like that is where a lot of growth,
Yeah.
most professional growth comes from,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So
There are learning opportunities, really.
100%. I think that's a
Hmm.
really good point to make. Um, so for women who are interested in these sort of technical and science-based roles in
Hmm.
horticulture, what is something you think is important for them to know going into this?
I think One of the most important things to know is that you don't need to have everything figured out before stepping into a technical role in horticulture.
Yeah.
A lot of the learning happens on the job, and you'll grow into your role over time. That's what happened for me. To be a bit vulnerable, when I first started in the industry, I came in feeling pretty confident. I had the knowledge and skills from my studies, including some cannabis experience and even having, contacts at Organigram for, working on projects with them. But during my first month, I was so lost. I didn't understand a lot of the words and the abbreviations that people were using on the cultivation floor. I didn't know microclimates were even a thing and how important they are into designing your experiments. And again, the speed at which the facility was operating was very overwhelming. And yeah, I could go on,
Yeah.
but ultimately that's part of the process. And you learn a lot by doing and you learn from your mistakes. I think I would also say it's important to trust that your perspective has value even early in your career. So don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to highlight your work, show your accomplishments. Um, we touched on this, confidence builds over time, but being a part of the conversation plays a big role in that. And I would say that staying curious and willing to learn goes a long way in this industry.
What are you most proud of in your work so far?
It's nice to look back and see all of the fun things and fun trials and accomplishments over the past few years. But I think what I'm most proud of is, yeah, seeing the work that my team and I have done actually make a difference.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of the trials we've worked on have led to positive changes in cultivation that have improved yields or reduced costs. And it's super rewarding to see those ideas go from something small to something that has a big impact at scale.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that I'm, proud of growing into a role where I can help bridge science and operations.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really unique and fun space to be in, and also to be a part of an industry that's still growing and evolving. On that note, there's still so much to learn, and it's exciting to know that the work we're doing now is going to help shape, the industry in the future or how things are going to be done in the future. So, yeah,
Yeah. I
I'd
mean,
close with that.
that is a great note to end on. And I just want to thank you on behalf of Greenhouse Canada and Fruit and Vegetable Magazines. Thank you for taking the time to share your story with our audience. And congratulations on being named among one of the first class of She Grows honorees.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
I would like to thank Noémi Pépin, one of our first She Grows inductees, for joining me to chat about her experience as a woman grower in the Canadian horticulture industry. And on behalf of Greenhouse Canada and Fruit and Veg Magazines, thank you for tuning in. Please be sure to check out the conversations with our other inspired growers featured as part of this year's group of She Grows honorees.